The impact of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 altered the destiny of America, but also changed the fate of many of its laborers, especially the Chinese teams, whose ingenuity and discipline had accomplished a legendary feat. What does the Transcontinental Railroad completion represent?
It's really cool for us today in the 21st century to think about infrastructures. We talk about the internet as an infrastructure and how it all connects us in various ways.
Yeah.
But the first really big infrastructure in the United States was the railroad.
Right.
And the Transcontinental Railroad in particular was of paramount importance because it physically and metaphorically linked the two coasts, the country together after the divisive Civil War.
Right.
And now you have a road of iron linking coast to coast and getting people from New York or San Francisco to each other coast in under 7 days, where it took 6 months to 6 weeks, if you were lucky, by ship, to get from one coast to the other. But now the country is whole.
Yeah. So in a way, it was the early internet.
Even differently, the railroad line carried freight. It could carry iron ore, coal, it could carry people.
Sure.
It certainly carried people, journalists and writers back and forth, so there was a transmission of ideas and culture, but also economically was extraordinarily important. Yeah, Leland Stanford had a sense of that, so when he came out here 150 years ago, he brought a bunch of dignitaries with him, and they had a celebratory event in his rail car, and he presented to them, these folks from the East Coast, California strawberries. And so that was more than just a delicious treat, but it meant something. And now you could have California strawberries, as we do today, all across the country because of the railroad. And California had a lot of going for it. And a lot of people in the rest of the country knew it, not the least of which was the harbor of San Francisco, which is the gateway to the Pacific and to Asia, but also the enormous agricultural potential of California. And then not just California, but then Utah and Nevada and the other states had all sorts of natural resources that could be exploited and were exploited. And then conversely, people from the East Coast could come out to California. California population started to grow quite quickly. And then people from California or from Asia could go from California to the East Coast. So you now have a real dispersion of people around the country, intermingling, and a boom in the population of the country.
At the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony, I met Dr. Gordon Chang, an expert on Asian American history at Stanford University and author of a book about Chinese labor on the Transcontinental Railroad. The story is both inspiring and, well, shameful. What was the significance of the Chinese immigrants who worked on the railroad?
Without them, the western portion of the Transcontinental could not have been completed. Up to 15, maybe 20,000 Chinese workers worked on the railroad line through over the 6 years of toil, and comprised about 90% of the railroad construction crew on the western portion. The toughest part of the railroad construction was to get the railroad line out of California and through the Sierra Nevada. And there you had to hit the summit area with solid granite cliffs and mountains, and then the tunneling. 15 tunnels through solid granite had to be done, and that was done by Chinese workers. And then they broke through to the east side of California and then get to Nevada and the high plains and deserts of Nevada and Utah with the blistering sun. I mean, it's almost inconceivable, kind of the physical conditions that they had to face. Really brutal conditions of both cold and hot, parched land and winds.
Really hard for us to imagine that today.
I think we're pretty soft today. You know, we like to be behind our computer and thinking we can travel the world on the internet, but not at that time.
I mean, I hear legends about how determined and how hardworking these Chinese immigrants were. So there was one specifically about like a 10-mile stretch that was completed in a day.
The two lines were hurriedly trying to lay as much track as possible because the length of track determined the profitability, the profits for the company. So both the two companies are competing in that legendary sort of story. So essentially, Union Pacific laid down 7 miles in one day, and then Crocker said we can do better, we can lay down 10 miles in a day, and people said that was impossible. And so an actual physical competition was established, and they started out about 15 miles to the west of us here. 3,000 Chinese workers and a handful of Irish rail workers started to work as an army and lay down, clear the rail, clear the area, lay down the bed, lay down the ties, embed them with ballast and the rail line, and more than 10 miles in less than 24 hours. It's a record that's never been built, all done by hand labor. So that was an extraordinary accomplishment, and witnessed by reporters and journalists and people from around the world, and they were astounded by the accomplishment.
How were these immigrants celebrated from that?
Today, we're reclaiming the Chinese, or acknowledging them that they hadn't been acknowledged properly in the past. But at the time, many of the people celebrate the Chinese railroad workers because their accomplishment was undeniable. And after the promontory, there were many articles in the press talking about the importance of the Chinese, the indispensability of their work, and their attractiveness as workers. And so the Chinese actually, some went back to China, some went back to the West Coast, but many others went eastward to build lines in the South, in Tennessee, in New York, in Alabama, in New York. So they went around the whole country building railroads and became known as sort of professional railroad workers. The Scientific American said the Chinese were born railroad builders. I mean, it was quite an honor, or praise of them. So at the time, they were honored, but then sadly, a counter movement arose of hostility toward the Chinese, and demeaned them, and drove them out, and saw them as labor competitors, and maybe even too good of workers. And so others wanted to get rid of them because they thought the country would be better without them. And it was a fight among the society at the time that eventually, however, the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 took place and dramatically limited the number of Chinese who could come into the country, and more began to leave because of the hostility. So because of their decrease in population and the hostility toward them in the public, memory of them and their reputation just was pushed further and further to the margins. So much of history as we receive it in our schools is really about the great men of history, the generals, the presidents, and corporate executives and so forth. But the majority of people are not those type of people. Most of the people are like us, we're everyday people. Right. And history is really important for us to appreciate, to embrace, and to know something, not just who we are, but how important working people are to the country, and not just the leaders or the elite.
This video is inspired by our PBS series, Reconnecting Roots. Visit reconnectingroots.com to watch the full episodes or to check out our music and podcast. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe so we can keep making more. Thanks for watching.